Ning, I'd like to thank everyone for zooming in this evening to tonight's talk pertaining to climate change and the the changes on our environment. And we have with us today, we have Hasan Doza, who will be giving a lecture about this present situation. And I'd like to thank Harry and everybody for zooming in. And without further ado, I'll turn over tonight's talk to Harry Doza.
Thank you, Stephen. As a lifelong New Yorker, it's a privilege to speak to all of you. First, I do want to thank Stephen and the library for making this event possible. It's really the dedication of the staff at the library which makes events such as these possible. So we should all thank Stephen and his colleagues at the library. Thank you. Now, the goal for this evening's discussion is simple. We're going to have a fun, interactive, and practical discussion on climate. And what do we mean by practical? Look, we all have, busy lives, work, families, kids, school, now summer camp. So in the midst, as we juggle all of this, the question is, what are some easy steps we can take in the midst of our busy lives that can potentially make a positive difference to our climate? So that's what we mean by practical, and we will talk about some of those steps. Let's start with the heat wave, which I'm sure all of you have been feeling this week and also throughout this summer. I mean, this has been 2 extended heat waves here just this summer. And, it's not a West Coast problem anymore. We're feeling kind of these extensive, long-lasting heat waves throughout the country, including here in the East Coast and up and down the East Coast. And as I'm sure you have probably seen in your phones and in the news, with these heat waves comes very poor air quality. Then you add in the hurricanes, the floods, and wildfire to the mix, and it all becomes very intense. What's becoming clear when we tie everything together is that it's becoming more and more evident that our climate is becoming or has become more volatile. And this variability in the climate, as I like to call it, has wide-ranging impact for our economy and throughout the economy in terms of the impact on home values, depending on where you live, impact on insurance rates, which have been skyrocketing in many parts of the country, and also in terms of food inflation, which all of us, I'm sure, feel when we go to the grocery store. So it's something, we have been feeling it, and it's something intense, and it has become more volatile and more unpredictable. The question is, what can we do about it? Just changing the slides, so give me a moment. The first thing we can do from a practical standpoint is let's become more knowledgeable about our electric power grid. And why is that important? As you can see in this pie chart, the 2 industries that have the most impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions are the electric power industry and the transportation industry. They account for about 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions that are emitted. And in this discussion today, we will focus on the electric power industry, which is where my background is, as I've been a research analyst following the electric power industry for the last 17 plus years. So we'll talk about in detail about this industry. Now, the good news is that our power sector, the electric power industry, has made good stride in reducing its carbon emissions footprint. As you see in this pie chart, the renewable forms of generation in terms of solar power, wind power, and hydropower generation now account for about 20% of our electricity mix. And having followed this industry for a long time, this is a big change. Just 10 years ago, the renewable portions of the footprint was quite small, and now it's 20%. So obviously, the industry has made great strides, but a lot more work to be done and a lot more investments to be made. And I'm sure, being in Long Island, we have heard about the offshore wind projects, and we will talk about them briefly, but a lot more work to be done from the point of view of further reducing the carbon emissions footprint and have more renewable forms of generation in the power mix. Now, this is one of my favorite slides. I call it the rubber meets the road slide. And why do I call it that? Is because it really kind of talks about our local utilities. And the reason that's important because our local utilities have a lot of sway in terms of long-term investments into the type of generation, whether it's renewable or traditional. And so our local utilities play an important role in our communities in terms of the type of generation that we're going to be having in our power grid. So the first practical step in terms of our climate, it's really to have a good understanding of our local utilities. And in Long Island, the primary utility serving the area is the Long Island Power Authority, which I'm sure many of you have heard. It's also the utility National Grid. And the third utility, which I would call it a newcomer, it's the utility called Ørsted. It's the power developer headquartered in Europe that is the main developer of the two offshore wind projects here in Long Island, the South Fork Wind Project, which has been up and running, and the larger Sunrise Wind Project, which is under construction in process to be up and running in a couple of years. So it's really these utilities that are investing for long-term generation. And as I'll talk about more, it's really as consumers, our utility bills that help finance these long-term renewable projects, such as South Fork Wind, such as Sunrise Wind. So it's really important for us to know if our money in terms of our monthly utility bill is really making a difference. So I would highly recommend each of us to become more familiar with our local utilities by going onto their website. There's actually a great deal of information in each of these utilities' website in terms of the projects they invest in and so forth. So I would highly encourage us to become familiar with our local utilities. We all get a very powerful piece of paper every month, whether we know it or not. Sometimes we may underestimate it. We get it monthly, we look at it, we pay our utility bill, and then we often forget about it. But it's actually a very powerful piece of paper. And the reason is that, as I mentioned just now, is our utility bill really helps finance many of these long-term projects that have meaningful impact to our electricity and power grid. So the paper we get every month, it's truly a powerful piece of paper. And I just want to spend a little bit of time kind of having us getting familiar with this piece of paper. if we look at our monthly utility bill, if you have it with you, that's great. If you don't worry about it. You can follow along on this slide. Typically, whether it's a water utility bill or a monthly electric utility bill, it has a meter number. And this might be a good opportunity sometime in the course of this summer. You may want to look as to where your electric and water meter is located in your house and make sure it's up and running properly and it's accurate. And if you find any issues with your water meter or your electric meter, feel free to contact your local utility. They're usually very helpful in resolving any issue with your meter, but it's really a great exercise to make sure that the meter is accurate, we know where it is, and make sure it's up and running properly. The next item that's typically listed on the utility bill, it's typically abbreviated with an acronym KWH. It simply means kilowatt hours, and it stands for the amount of electricity we use each month. And all these utilities now have great online portals, and you will see this also in the paper bill. There are usually like a chart which shows the monthly electricity usage, and you can compare it to your usage in prior years, like the same month, July of this year versus last year. And it's really a great tool to monitor your electric or water usage by either the paper bill or the online portal. And personally, I really love the graph. So whenever I get my monthly utility bill, the first thing I look at is the chart or the graph, which shows my monthly usage and compares it to last year and prior years. It's really a great tool. The second item you might notice on your bill is something called a supply charge. And this is a charge that the utility has in terms of the need to procure the power that's delivered to us. So that's the cost for the utility to procure the power that's supplied to us. And the final charge in our bill is something you will notice called a delivery charge. And this is the cost for the utility to deliver the power directly to our homes, and is the cost to maintain those utility poles, the utility cables that you see coming to your home. And the aggregation of these items, the monthly usage, the supply charge, and the delivery charge kind of is the combination of the monthly electric bill. And this piece of paper, which goes into financing many of the long-term investments that we talked about, it's really the bedrock. So it's really goes a long way from a practical perspective as a utility consumer to become familiar with this bill. And we want this discussion to be as interactive as possible. So when we open this up for Q&A after the prepared presentation, please ask as many questions as you may have on your monthly utility bill or your local utilities, and happy to have an interactive discussion on that subject. Now, you recall I mentioned we all have our busy lives, right? So we're all juggling many things at the same time. One of the easiest steps that we can integrate into our busy lives, into our daily routine, is the idea of conservation. And by that, it really simply means lower use. It could be the lower use of energy, lower use of water. It's using our electricity less. When each of us does it collectively, it does make a difference in reducing greenhouse emissions. And it's really one of the simplest and one of the most cost-effective ways to lower greenhouse gas emissions. It's simply use less electricity, use less water, use less resources. And not only does it collectively help us lead to a less emissions, it also gives us the idea of building more savings in our pockets. And that's why I put the jar of money in this slide. When we collectively, each of us use less electricity, we use less money and we pay less money in our monthly utility bills. And think about the savings we could generate and what we can do with the extra savings, whether or not it means a great vacation with your family, whether it means donating to your favorite charity, or just simply investing that money. But if you use conservation, use less electricity, and have more money in your pockets, that's a win-win for everyone. And what are some tips in terms of the idea of conservation and using less electricity as an example? And by the way, I've been doing this during this heat wave this summer. One of the first things, we always have the habit of turning on the AC during the hottest part of the day. And that's probably not the right way to go about it. What I typically do is turn on the AC during off-peak hours. And what it means, early part of the day, perhaps before you head to work, you can turn on the AC, cool your place or your home a little bit, turn it off. So when you come back home, it's nice and cool. And then you can turn it back on maybe a little bit during the evening. So during the peak hours, the AC is not running, and you will notice that difference in your monthly utility bill. The second thing that I've been doing and what I find really helpful is investing in a simple stand or tower fans. And I usually run it, during parts of the day when it's really hot, and they are a really great complementing tool to the AC. So without running the AC all day, we can complement the cooling through simple tower fans. It will definitely have a lower impact on monthly electric bill, and it also has a lower carbon emissions footprint. So I really find the tower or simple stand fans during intense heat waves to be very beneficial as opposed to running the AC all day long. Also, another tip is, if I have a home washer and dryer, use it in the morning and use it in terms just doing a cold wash. Typically, the cold wash uses less energy, less electricity. So you're definitely conserving electricity on a hot summer day. And if you use it in the morning, it's also avoiding electricity usage during peak hours. Another thing I personally did during this spring is, kind of spring clean the refrigerator. Believe it or not, over time, there's a lot of junk that kind of builds up in your coils of your fridge. And you can simply take a vacuum cleaner and you can clean the coils. Of course, you have to turn off your fridge and clean it, or you can even have a professional clean the fridge, the coils, but it definitely improves the energy efficiency of the fridge. And once a year in spring, I did it this year, but it's definitely a good exercise to kind of spring clean your fridge. So during the hot summer days when your fridge is running, it will definitely be more energy efficient. Something else that we may want to do is also become more cognizant about how we use water during hot summer days. As we mentioned before, intense heat waves and even droughts are not just for the desert Southwest or western part of the country. In prior years, we have had water restrictions in parts of the East Coast. So conserving water is something that is beneficial not just for the environment but also for our own pocketbooks. And I'll explain how. Typically in a hot summer day, we have the tendency, and I used to do it myself, buy bottled water. But after a while, it gets very expensive, and the environmental footprint of bottled water is not that positive. As you may have read, a lot of these spent water bottles, the plastic waste, goes into landfill. And one of the greenhouse gases that is actually more harmful than carbon dioxide is methane. And methane emissions occur typically from landfills. So if we can lower our landfill footprint by having, for example, less plastic waste, it's definitely a positive contribution in terms of less greenhouse gas emissions. And one of the cost efficient ways to do it is to invest in a water filter. So you can have a water filter where you can take the tap water. And by the way, the tap water in New York City and Long Island is very good. So in additional protection via a water filter and drinking the water that comes out of the tap, it is very safe and it's very cost efficient and affordable. And what I do is also buy a reusable water bottle. So if you're going to work, you're going, to meet a friend, you're going for your daily errands, take the water bottle with you. So have the filter water in your water bottle, and you can carry it around throughout the day. It's definitely, as I mentioned, much cheaper than bottled water, and the payback is within a month. You'll see that the amount of money you can save by not having to buy bottled water, it really adds up after a month. You will see month over month during the course of the summer. It's really, I talked about the savings jar. You will really see the savings jar add up when you kind of have a water filter and have a reusable water bottle and not having to worry about buying a bottled water every week. And some, water saving tips for the summer. I actually did it from my car last year. Believe it or not, I did not wash my car in a car wash last summer. And, my car did not complain. He was fine with it. Hopefully I can get by with that this summer. Usually you can wash your car with a bucket of soap and water. You can avoid the car wash. You can avoid like running the hose for a long time. So definitely minimizing, car wash trips. I call it kind of a smarter car wash. Is something we may want to consider, especially during these intense hot summers. Also, there are ways to have water efficient shower heads that you can actually look up, for example, through the EPA website. And a lot of this stuff can be had for free that you can order online. And something, very interesting and new that some people may find interesting is, there are ways to also store rainwater through rain barrels. And many local water utilities in your town, in your municipality, in your city would be happy to provide like free and safe rain barrels. And you may want to look into it for your home, because I think preserving water through when there is rain could also be a great source of water for your lawn, for your car wash, as opposed to using fresh water. So definitely having the ability to store rainwater and then using it is a great benefit in terms of conservation. So there are many practical everyday steps we can take through electricity and water conservation that I think really adds up in terms of lowering the carbon footprint and at the same time having a meaningful effect in our own pocketbooks. And the last step that I like to highlight, and this is something, I personally became more knowledgeable as I have become more familiar in the energy utilities industry over the years is there's a great opportunity for all of us to participate as consumers of energy, electricity, and water. It's called a rate setting process, and it typically happens every couple of years where our local utilities have to change their rates uh, for maintenance and long-term investments of the water infrastructure or the electric power infrastructure. And this rate setting process is a great opportunity for consumers like all of us to provide our input on the quality of service we get, share key priorities as a consumer, and also understand the details behind the increases of our monthly utility bills. And the two bodies that typically oversee the utility increases, one of them is the New York Public Service Commission. This is the regulatory body that oversees electric utilities in the state of New York. There's a local branch of that. It's the Department of Public Service, Long Island. I highly encourage to get familiar in both of these websites. They are terrific websites. The New York Public Service Commission website has links to, you will find public hearings on many topics. There are monthly meetings of commissioners. So it's really a great open forum, a process for all consumers, for all of us to become educated. So I highly encourage, in addition to becoming familiar with our local utilities, to become familiar with this regulatory process through the New York Public Service Commission or the Department of Public Service of Long Island, and participate on a regular basis on our electricity power needs here. Before we open it up for Q&A, I always like to mention, to wrap it up, is we talked about how our climate has become more volatile. So use this opportunity to be prepared. And the example that I use is, if you recall, a couple of months ago, back in April, we had this earthquake here in the East Coast that started in the New York, New Jersey area. It was a 4.8 magnitude earthquake that originated in New Jersey, and it was the largest earthquake in over 140 years here in the New York and New Jersey area. And the point being is that always expect the unexpected in terms of natural events. We always thought earthquakes were a West Coast phenomenon, but we just had it in April here in the East Coast. And there could be other natural phenomena, whether it's tornadoes, hurricanes, floods. But I always like to use this latest earthquake because it's fresh in our minds as an opportunity to be prepared for any climate related events that we may have, as our climate has become more variable, more volatile. And, use this conversation as we're just having as sort of a first opportunity to have a dialogue. Feel free to send feedback to Stephen at the library. My direct email is listed here. If there are other topics within the broader climate umbrella, I know many of you might be interested in the offshore wind project of the coast in Long Island. Many of you might be interested in the other topics. Feel free to send your feedback, whether it's now or in the future, to Stephen directly or to me, and happy to have future discussions on any other climate related topics that are pertinent to Long Island and that may be of interest to you. And I just also want to mention, being a lifelong New Yorker, the two things I love to discuss are climate and sports, especially our New York sports teams. And I have a podcast. It's called the Doza sportscast. So if you have an interest in our local New York teams, feel free to tune into the Doza Sportscast. It's a fun podcast that's available in both Spotify and Apple. Thank you very much for your time. This was the prepared part of the presentation. We wanted to leave enough time for interaction and feedback. So, Stephen, let's open it up for Q&A, and perhaps you can start with a question that you may have or your colleagues may have. So we are fully engaged with the audience and happy to take any questions.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute. I'd like to thank Harry for this great presentation, and especially going over the bills, the electric bills, how to read the electric bills, because there's a lot of wording that might become difficult on there, and the ways that we can save um, on energy, but also at the same time save money. Um, the the light bulbs that are power savers, they are they're pretty inexpensive, and they're good to be used, in various in the lamps, or I have some of them in a chandelier. Um, there's other ways with the air conditioning. If you have an HVAC system and you're using it less, that's less times you have to get the filters changed. So you're saving money in that sense. And also, if you have an in the window air conditioner, um, that too in the front has a filter. So the less usage, the more that energy can be conserved. And as far as a water filter, I have in my kitchen it's called an e-spring system, and I have it hooked up from the faucet, but you could also hook them up from the pipes underneath, and it has a filter, and it has a very, very long life. We just pull a little pin out on the faucet, and the water starts to filter, the little machine starts to beep, and it makes a great glass of water. And it's a good system. But there are others. They still sell that very nice Brita, where you can fill that up with the filter and put that in the refrigerator. And all of those are good to use instead of buying bottled water.
I like the tip about the refrigerator. So I never thought about how the coil, especially because they're in, the back of the refrigerator. I never look back there. So I like that as a tip. I never thought about that. And I also think that when you go to replace any of your appliances, to look for the energy efficient ones. Because obviously the more efficient something is, the more it'll save you money. So thank you for that. I like that one. Now, washing my car, I let the rain do that. I actually, because my car lives in the garage. And so if it rains, that's when I just get a little sponge and I wipe it up. And there you go. I don't even bother with soap and water.
Yeah, I've noticed that too with everything. Like if you buy a new television, they have right on the display energy saver mode, so you can have it in energy saver mode, and it'll use less power. But they're making products now that use less power than, in the past. If somebody had, say, though collectors may collect them, but if somebody had a stereophonic tube receiver, that would pull in a lot more power than if somebody had a phone through a Bluetooth. But it's just one of the many ways to save power.
Yeah, the other thing about my bill is now I don't live in Long Island. Sorry, I know it's not one word, but that's how I was taught because I grew up in Manhattan. Um, I live upstate New York now, or in the Hudson Valley,
Okay.
and I have Central Hudson,
Okay.
and on their bill, they just recently went to every month checking the meters. It used to be every other month they would estimate, and so as you said, looking back a year, it was hard to assess it if it was estimated or real. And even so, what would happen is if they overestimated it the next month, it was underestimated or the bill was cheaper. So you could never tell what you were paying. But they just recently went back to every month. But they also have a thing where they compare me with my neighbors, where they tell me how, if I'm using more or less energy with my neighbors, which I think is kind of cool to see because I have no idea how much electricity I should be using or not. Like, how do you figure out just to know it is a normal bill, other than like, I've been paying this amount, pay about 100 a month. If it was more than that, like, I don't know how to look at my wattage and go, oh, okay, yeah, that's what I used. Well, I need some kind of monitor. Is there something I buy to?
There are like standards for what you would do. Like you could Google like for example the average kilowatt hour usage per month in the upstate New York area, and you can see the kilowatt hour if that's in the ballpark to what you're using. So you can check that. I usually check it by the area that you live in, like the average home, like what kind of electricity they use. So that would be kind of a ballpark way to figure out if your the kilowatt hour number is kind of in the order of magnitude. And your local utilities website should also have that information. Like they typically have information as to what is the typical monthly electricity usage in your area. And so that information, if you like go to their website, they should have it.
Okay, thanks.
By the way, I love your background. Is that the Grand Canyon?
Yes. um, well, you get to pick a picture as opposed to the blurry background. So
No, I
I'm
love
a
I love the desert Southwest. It's one of my favorite part of the country. So that's how I recognized it right away at the Grand Canyon.
yeah, I'm a retired earth science teacher. So the different layers of by the way, New York has had earthquakes all throughout its history. If you go to the museum in Albany,
Uh-huh.
they have an actual exhibit dedicated to showing you how often we have earthquakes. They're just so minor and
Right.
so deep that we don't feel them. But I can remember several years back, I was at a workshop. We were outside in the field and we felt another earthquake. So it's just a reminder, though, of at any moment. I mean, New York City is built on a fault. It's built on the Ramapo Fault. I don't, you know, people who also live in San Francisco, like these are the things that they should expect to happen and should be prepared for them. And I think what really bothered me about this heat wave was it was totally unexpected. I did not expect my climate to feel like I lived in Florida. Because if I wanted to live in Florida, I'd be in Florida. I don't not in New York. That acclimation going from spring to summer, it was the extremes. One day I'm comfortable at 70 and the next day it's 95 with high humidity and I'm dying, I'm melting. So that's a scary part.
Good. Well, listen, I think we have taken a good amount of everyone's time, and you have our email, Stephen. You have my email as well. So if you have any feedback, any kind of programming that you would like to see in the future under the climate umbrella, please feel free to provide your feedback. And again, I really, really want to thank. One of my favorite things, I always browse like the events hosted by this library, and I always tell Stephen and the staff they do a great job with events. So I really, all of us want to thank Stephen and the staff for putting together great events. And again, thank you for having me as a speaker. So thank you, Stephen and the library, for hosting this event this evening. Really appreciate your hard work.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Harry, and thank you, Stephen, so that
Thank,
I could be here on Zoom.
thank you very much. We'll see everybody on the next lecture. Till then, have a great night and a great week ahead.
Stay cool.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.